The musical Fiddler on the Roof opens up with a wonderful musical number called Tradition. It sort of sets the stage for the show that follows it. If you're not aware, Fiddler on the Roof takes place at the turn of the 20th century in Russia, and a small Jewish community that's gathered in a tiny little, almost insignificant Russian town called Anatevka. The characters in Anatevka are the only ones that we will see in the play, and their dramas are going to be primarily personal. Tevye, the father, who's the one that sings Tradition at the beginning of the show and has the most memorable role in the musical. Tevye has 5 daughters, and he's about to learn that he cannot arrange their marriages, that each of them want to fall in love with someone, how novel, and choose their own husband, and this is so world-spinning to him. So the story is all about Tevye coming to terms with the world that is continually changing and traditions that don't always stay the same the way that they are. But this is also a action that's happening in an historical context. I told you, the Jewish community in Russia at the turn of the 20th century. During that time, Jewish communities gathered in very small places, and like many other Jewish communities, particularly in the 18th, 19th, and 20th century, they almost always were oppressed by either governments or other religions, that they've lived a time of experiencing both discrimination and oppression. This forms a backdrop to the play. It happens in the musical, where you can see how the people in Anatevka who just want to preserve their traditions, preserve their ways of life, are threatened by a world that's hostile to the way that they believe and to the way that they pray. The song Tradition is all about what tradition is. It's setting the stage, as I said, for the show, and there's a moment in there that I think is really wonderful. And it's where we meet the rabbi, and of course for the town of Anatevka, the local rabbi would be a most important person, sort of like your Catholic pastor, but a little bit different. And anyway, he's that important person. So they, knowing that the problems that they're experiencing with local politics and even national politics, one of the townspeople comes to the rabbi and he says, "Rabbi, is there a proper blessing for the Tsar?" Remember, this is the first decade of the 20th century. Russia is still ruled by the Tsars, the oligarchs. That's all going to change. We know that. The characters don't know that. They only experience the harshness that comes from the Tsar's rule. "Rabbi, is there a proper blessing for the Tsar?" The rabbi knows he's being asked a loaded question. What is a good way to answer this question? It's the times of oppression. You never know who's your friend and who's your foe. You could be a government plant or whatever. And but he's a wise rabbi, kind of stands back and then he smiles. And he says, "Well, may God bless and keep the Tsar far away from us." And then the song and the play continues. But I love the way that the rabbis ask a loaded question and he doesn't give an expected answer. Perhaps the audience wants him to say the Tsar is a criminal and God, we shouldn't pray for him. Or who knows what the motive of the questioner is. It's only important to know that the rabbi knows that it's a loaded question and he needs to give a godly answer, which is exactly what he does. May God bless and keep the Tsar far away from us. May whatever happens not cause us to experience suffering. A most excellent prayer. The gospel, of course, is well known to us. That phrase that I opened up the liturgy with, where Jesus has presented a dilemma. And we're even told in the prologue as to the story in the gospel that the questioners that come to him, Herodians and Pharisees, are trying to trap him. They're trying to get him to say something that's going to get him in trouble. They desire for him to be put to death by the Romans, who are the occupiers. And so we must know that unlike in Fiddler on the Roof, where we don't know the motive of the questioner, this time we do know the motive of the questioner. They're trying to ensnare Jesus. I always think this is interesting. Jesus, who is the Son of God, it's like he knows everything that's going on. And so he's very aware that they're trying to trap him. And so they ask him, is it lawful to pay the tax, the census tax, to the Romans? This was the pressing issue of the day in first century Israel, where today's gospel takes place. The Romans had occupied for some period of time, and much like in Russia, their occupation was harsh. And once again, the people in the Holy Land experienced servitude, being under the oppression of others. And it was episodic. For a while they would be easy to get along with. They wouldn't bother anybody. Then there would be these periods where there would be oppression and there would be all kinds of violence and carnage. And taxation was a particular difficulty because most of them had very little money, and then they were expected to take what little they had and pay it back to the Romans, who already had more than enough denariuses in their own pockets. This is the context for the questioners to come to Jesus and say, is it lawful to pay the tax to Caesar? Jesus asks them to produce the coin that they're speaking of. And one of them takes the coin out of their pocket. And then he asks, whose inscription's on the front, who's on the back? You heard all of that in the story. The purpose of Jesus asking, of course, is to already demonstrate that the questioners have made their mind up. They're paying taxes to the Romans because they have the coinage that goes back to the Romans. To traffic in Roman coinage is to take a part of Roman law, and it is a necessity then to give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. That's really the whole nature of that. And so without saying the words, he says, you've made your choice. And so give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God. He refuses to walk into the trap. He doesn't take sides in a political argument about whether the Romans should tax the Jews or the Jews should be immune from the tax because they're not Roman. You might say he doesn't seem to have a dog in that fight, but actually he has both dogs in that fight. Well, the news accounts are to be believed, and when you watch the news, what can you say? They keep telling us that we are now experiencing the most consequential presidential election of our lives. I don't know if you'll remember. I remember these things because I have to watch them out of my own interest. 4 years ago, they said that one was going to be the most consequential. And I remember in 2012, they said that one was. I can go all the way back to about 1964. My memory doesn't go much past that. But in each time, whatever we were doing was the most important thing we've ever done. You're never going to see anything like this again. In other words, we have heard these words before, and we hear them. Here we're on the precipice then of what we're told is the most consequential, or the most recent, most consequential election of our lives. And for many people, we know that it's just riddled with all kinds of difficulties. And for many of us, unless you're really passionate on the subject, and people that are passionate, there's nothing wrong with being passionate about who you think you should be president, but people who are passionate frequently don't understand the vast majority of people who aren't passionate and really don't want to experience passion, and they really don't want to experience an argument about what's going to take place. So that's the dynamic in which all of these conversations and things are unfolding. Which side are you on? Well, I don't want to be on one particular side. And so we begin to look behind the questions when we're asked and wonder, what's the hidden agenda here? Is there a trap here? Am I going to say something that's going to get me into some kind of trouble? We got a letter from one of our flock this last week that asked us why we did not mention President Trump and his wife in the prayers of the faithful. Was there something missing? And I'm able to respond back to her that if you listen to the prayers of the faithful every week, without question, we pray for every victim of the coronavirus for their healing. I wondered to myself, what is behind that question? Is it an attempt to say, are we favoring one candidate over the other or not? The subject comes up to me often. If I talk about abortion, a central issue to our Catholic faith, which is the sanctity of human life, people looking behind it immediately saying, what does that mean? Do you favor this particular candidate or that particular candidate? And then we're not able to have the discussion I want us to have about the morality of abortion because we're allowing the political implications to get in the way. You see, it's that process we do where we're trying to say, what is this question being asked of me, and what trap am I about to walk into? It's a loaded question, indeed it is. And so I'm asked often as pastor, it amazes me how often I'm asked about who I support for the president. And here's the answer that I'll give to anyone that asks. That happens to be none of your business. And you know what? Your support also is none of my business as well. And when I say none of my business, it doesn't mean I'm ashamed about who I support. I may not even made up my mind about who I support. It simply means that we don't need to be trafficking in that conversation, to have whatever it is that we do. I want the freedom, as I must have as the pastor of the parish, to preach without without it being an endorsement of this person or that person or this movement or that movement. And the one, are you liberal? Are you conservative? I'm neither of those things. I'm Roman Catholic, and I'm an ordained priest. And the church's mission has been consistent since Jesus Christ entered onto the scene. The church exists for one reason, and it isn't the promotion of this candidate or that candidate. It's not the promotion for this particular piece of legislation or that particular thing. It's not for the resolution of this moral drama or that moral drama. All of those things. The church exists for one purpose and one purpose alone: the salvation of souls. That's what I promised the Archbishop 21 years ago, and I laid down on the floor of the cathedral that I would have a zeal for the salvation of souls. And since that has to be my most preeminent concern, then I can't express an opinion publicly on who should be president, who shouldn't. I don't know that I really have an educated opinion on that question in the first place, and that someone should really care, one way or the other. But the fact that that might be a loaded question, yeah, I do want to care about that. And when it's like, because people would wonder, does God care who wins the presidential election, the most consequential presidential election of our lives? So we're told. Does God care? I have a quick answer: yes, God does care. Does God care about President Trump? He absolutely does. Does God care about Vice President Joe Biden? Yes, he does. Does he care about all those other third-party candidates? We can't even think of their names or the names of their different parties. Guess what? He does. He even cares about President Yeltsin over in Russia. There's nobody that God does not care about. You're not going to get anywhere asking, does God care about one thing over another thing? Because what God's love is for his creatures is unconditional and uncompromising. And what God's mission is the salvation of every human soul, from the most destitute one you can imagine to the most closed-minded one that you can imagine. That's what God cares about. The scriptures are clear on it. It even says in Luke's gospel that God says, I even care about the sparrows that are flying in the air. When a sparrow falls to the earth, I care about that. I care about every hair on your head. It's been counted. A God that cares that deeply, that profoundly, is not choosing sides in an election. He's not deciding whether you're liberal or conservative, whether you support the right to choose or you believe in the fundamental right to human life enshrined in political arguments or any of the other different things that take place of that. It's not that God doesn't care. It's that however you enter into that conversation does not change God's love for you. And God's mission through his church, he established his church not to give us political peace, because guess what? We're never going to have political peace. And guess what? 4 years from now, they will tell us this is the most consequential election of our lives. They'll never quit telling us that what God cares about is our salvation. So back to that loaded question. Repay to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God. You and I are citizens, and the church teaches this. As a citizen, we have a responsibility as a citizen of our country to exercise what's called faithful citizenship. That means that we engage to the best of our abilities in public affairs, and to the best of our abilities make up our mind about these kinds of things that are important, including the issues that we might vote for, candidates that we might vote for. There's no easy way for many of us to make up our minds about that. For example, the two amendments on the ballot, this one, I defy anyone to explain the second one. It's longer than Moby Dick. It's such a long novel. Who knows on heaven's earth what's in there? How do we make up our minds about something like that? But it is that our responsibility is to participate in the process. That's how we give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. Our best job of trying to do our best job of voting for someone. Repaying to God what belongs to God is simpler than we realize. We're doing it right now. There's a few of us here this morning. The weather's foul outside. There's a pandemic going on. But what we're doing right now is celebrating a sacrament together. And the sacrament, unlike every other transactional thing that happens in our life, and all politics, no matter which side you're on, are transactional. They're just simply their very inherent nature is that they're that way. The sacraments are not transactional. In the sacrament of the Eucharist, God gives the entirety, the fullness of his body and blood to you and I. He expresses to the absolute magnitude and expression as possible his unconditional love for each and every one of us. He says that he will be with us until the end of time. There's literally nothing else more that he can give in the sacrament. How do we repay to God what God has given to us? And the one thing that God gives us the free will to do is to love him in return. And that's how we pay God. When we love him in return, when we allow his sacrament to feed us, when we allow his offer to save our souls, free us from the tyranny of sin and evil. You see, that is what takes place in church, and that's why what we do here is of absolute, total, epic significance, much more significant than who wins a presidential election, much more significant than all the other ideological battles that we deal with on a daily basis. And I hate to say this is even more significant than how the Alabama Crimson Tide does in football this year, although that is really, really, really important to me, and you all know that it is. It's still more significant than anything else. You see, this is the only thing that matters. So I can't tell you to vote for. I'm not even sure to vote for myself. And anyone that says they can should be taken with a grain of salt. The reality is the exercise of your faithful citizenship is your business and no one else's business alone. That's why we have a sealed ballot. That's why we have a secret ballot. That's why the privacy is so very important. All of these things will be challenges for us. We wonder, is there a proper prayer for this presidential election? There is one. May God bless and keep the drama of the presidential election far away from us. That would be a wonderful thing. But I'm not going to leave you with that. I'm going to leave you with something I think even better. In the midst of all the consternation and all the problems and all the troubles that we face, personal ones, bigger ones, all this difficult existence that occupies our time, God continually reminds us of one thing, that he loves us, that he has always loved us, that he will always love us, that he will give us the entirety of everything that he has to us. He wishes only our love in return, which we can freely choose to give him. And he says, I am God, and I approve this message.